Zog to Hilgah Gemara, 3 lines from the top and Daf Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. Amar Rav, Amar Reb Chasa. Rava said in the name of Reb Chasa, they quoted a shaila. Boy Ravami. Ravami had a shaila. Aina ein lahem. We've learned in the Mishnah that karkoyis and hekdeshos and avodim and stars don't have aina, which means if you overcharged by exactly 1/6, it's kana umachzor aina. But what about if the aina was more than a shtuf? Would they have bittul mekach? Bittul mekach yesh lahem or ein lahem? Will they have bittul mekach? That was the shaila. As Rashi explains, miar minon mi'altoinu hu de imut. The miut is from the pasuk of altoinu. V'ha lav b'chlal einohu. But when there's a eino that's greater than a sixth, it's not even labeled as eino, rather ela mekach tosu. That's considered a mekach tos. Or maybe kivin de lav davar shebemidahu. It's not a davar shebemida, which we say that there's bittul mekach even with a mashu. V'loi atay b'divurei, and there is no, he didn't fool him at all. Kishar din I know, therefore it should be like any other din I know, or not. Maybe there's no bittul mekach. Amar Rab Nachman, Hada Amar Rab Chasa. Then Rab Chasa said that Pashat Rabami was Pashat the very shaila that he asked. And then what did he say? I know ein lahem, but bittul mekach yesh lahem. In fact, all these items, if you overcharge by more than a sixth, in fact, it would be bittul mekach. Rabbi Yoina said that the following halacha that we're going to quote in the name of Rabbi Yochanan was only said in reference to a hakdeshos. Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar, but Rabbi Yirmiyah said the halacha that we're about to quote from Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Akarkois, was said regarding karka. V'tarvayu mishmeid Rabbi Yochanan. They're both quoting halachas in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. And what is the halacha? The long anticipated halacha. This shaila that we had, Aino ein lahem bittul mekach yesh lahem. Even though they don't have a din Aino, but they do have a din of bittul mekach. Meaning if the overcharge is more than a sixth, the whole deal is off. Mandamar akteshos. The mandamar, like Rabbi Yoina, who said that Rabbi Yochanan said this regarding akteshos, kol shekei nakarkois. Surely karka would also have a din of mekach tos. As Rashi says, Mandamar Akdeshus, Amar of Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan says Allah even by Akdeshus, Kol Shekain, the Akarkois Nami Amar, surely by Karka there's a din metal mekach. Why? The Kibbadash we know the bittul mekach. La Bichlal Oinohi. Once we know that bittul mekach is not considered Oinoh, it's a new concept. So Karka, Hektish, those are excluded from the Oinoh. But this is not Oinoh. This is a new thing called mekach tos. So then, why should there be a difference between hekdeshus or karkois? Mechimit. Ide hekdeshus kachoshav le mekach tos. Even if you consider an overcharge of more than a sixth, a mekach tos by hektish, afal gav the leka tos klap b'shmaya. Even though hektish doesn't make mistakes, your bonus doesn't make mistakes. Afilu hachi amrina bittul mekach. We still say bittul mekach. Kol again the legabe. Chavre, when you're buying something from a yochid, the klamemer ta, we could say it was a mekach tos, badaita dahachi lo yakanya, and he never bought it, thinking that it would be such a overpayment. Kolshkin dahada, surely there's mikol mekach. But madamar karkoyis, Rabbi Yirmiyah, who quoted Rabbi Yochanan as paskin into the bittul mekach by karkoyis, aval ahekdeshois loy. But could be by hekdesh, there would not be a din of bittul mekach. And it will always be chal b'mechira. It won't be bottle. As Rashi says, "Avlakdeshus loy." You look at a hedyet. I mean, in Torah, by a hedyet you say it's a mekach tos. It was a mistake. But that dachi loyakmi. Aval hekdesh like lememach. Hekdesh doesn't make mistakes. Even the less nuhu, but din I know, since there's no din I know by hekdesh, because the pasuk says asochiv tos nami loy amrina behu. We say there's no din tos either. Shmuel, like Shmuel taught us, and what did Shmuel teach us? Shmuel, even if you are machal a very expensive piece of hektish with mere pennies, it will still work. It will still work. Zog Rashi, mechulo kido amran, like we said, the imut mehina, there's no dinayma, the tos nami lekalameimar behu, and there's no tos. The man hektish doesn't make this. So that is the shita of Shmuel. Gewalt. It's not else we learned. Im hoya kodesh balmum. So we're talking about this Mishnah speaking about Tamura. Tamura, when you say zu, Tamura zu, both animals have kedusha. However, if the animal that you're taking the kedusha off is a balmum, then it's not a Tamura. You could be pointed. And therefore, Yotza L'chulin, the animal was Yotza L'chulin, because we know a balmum, you could be mechalel. A balmum, you could redeem. But you have to make the money equal. Let's see what Rashi says. In my Yekadeh Balmum, Reish the Mesnisin Hachi, Ha'omer Harezu Tachazu, or Zu Tamurasu, or Zu Chalufazu, all these are Lashonis of Tamura Harezu Tamura. But if you say Zu Mechulela Tzalzu, then Lo Yomar Klum, that's not a Lashon of Tamura. Shein carbon Tamim Mischalel. You could never be Mechalel. Take the Kedusha off a carbon that does not have a mum. The Im Haya Kodesh Balmum, but if the behema of Kachim that he started off with was a Balmum, then Yatsa L'chulin. V'tzarech Lazes Le'domim. What does that mean? Im Ein Zu Shal Chulin Yofa Kishal Hektish. If the animal that he's putting the Kedusha on is not worth as much as the animal that he's taking the Kedusha off of, Moisef Aleh Ma'osav At Kedei Demei Hektish. He has to pay the difference. So the animal that he's taking the Kedusha off is worth 1,000. The animal that he's putting the Kedusha on is worth 800. He still has to give another $200 to Hektish. Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan made a comment on this brisa. Yotza l'chulin dvar Torah. Midaraisa, it's a good chilul. Midaraisa, like Shmuel says, you could be mechalel $1,000 animal on something that's only worth $800. So why do you have to add money to it? If the chilul works, it's only a din derabanan to protect Hekdish's interests, and that's why you have to add the rest of the money. But for Shlokish Amar, af tzarich lasas leidamim min Torah. Midaraisa, it's not a good chilul unless you add money to it. As Rashi explains on the second white line, the gabi hekdeshos, whenever the Torah discusses redeeming hekdesh, the Torah throws in the word erkecha, which means its value. Erkecha ksiva b'chul. Because sover erkecha shavya imash. Resh Lakish is going to learn at this point in the Gemara that erkecha means when you redeem something, you have to redeem it for its value. Rabbi Yochanan said it is a good chilul midaraisa. So how does he understand the erkecha? Rabbi Yochanan sover erkecha kol domim sheyarchu mashmlei. However you assess it, that will be erkecha. Imzil Yorker. If you assess it for a lot, then that will be its determined value. If you assess it for a little bit, then that will be its determined value. This discussion of the brisa that Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish weighed in on, where Rabbi Yochanan said that midaraisa it's a good chilul and Rish Lakish holds it's not. How off was it? How off was this assessment? If we're talking about exactly Kedeyana, how could Rish Lakish say that you have to pay up? Didn't we just say there's no dinay no for hektish? But our own Mishnah tells us, and one of items on the list are so clearly, if you only overcharge hektish or underpaid hektish by 1/6, for sure that's going to be chal. Because that's what our Mishnah says, there's no dinay no. So where would Rish Lakish say that it wouldn't be a good chilul until you make up the difference in cost? El bittul mekach, it has to be a case of bittul mekach where you underpaid hektish by more than 1/6. Correct Gemara, if you underpaid hektish by more than 1/6, Bahal lemer Rabbi Yochanan, tzorach lasas leidamim midavreim, there would Rabbi Yochanan say, even midrabanan you have to pay up? We Amar Rabbi Yoina, Hekdeshos. Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Kakos. Rabbi Yoina said that according to Rabbi Yochanan, so this kash is on Rabbi Yoina. Rabbi Yoina said that according to Rabbi Yochanan, by hektish there is no dinay no. But there is a din bittul mekach. So if there is a din bittul mekach, how is this chilel going to work? So it's going to be shver on Rabbi Yoina. Yom Rabbi Yoina, Hakdesh Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Akarkois for Tavai Mishmei Rabbi Yochanan Amri. They both in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. I know Ein Lahem B'Bitul Mekach Yesh Lahem. So according to Rabbi Yoina, that Rabbi Yochanan said by Hektish there's Bitul Mekach. How in the world does this pigeon work? Even Midaraisa. Let's say this big Bitul Mekach. But you know what we're going to do? The Epoch, the Rabbi Yochanan, the Rish Lakish, the Rish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan. Let's say, according to Rabbi Yoina, we'll flip it around and we'll say it's Rabbi Yochanan who said that Ikar Din, you have to add the money. And it's Rish Lakish who holds it's only Midarabon. The Ma'akamivili, what would the Machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish be as to whether or not it's a good chilo, even though you underpaid hektish by more than a sixth? B'dish Shmuel, they're arguing about Shmuel's halacha that we just quoted. Damar Shmuel, hektish shavimona shechilaloi al shavapruta mechulal. Mar islay the Shmuel, the shita that says it's mechulal, but you only have to add money midrabanan, holds like Shmuel. The shita that holds midaraisa, you have to add money. Mar leslie the Shmuel holds not like Shmuel, and therefore you have to add the money. That's one version of how we can understand the machlokes of whether or not midaraisa you have to pay up the difference or midarabban. But Iboy Sema, there's other ways to understand it where it won't be told in Shmuel. The chulama is the Shmuel. Let's say everybody can agree to Shmuel that me'ikar adin, it's a good chilo. Here is what the discussion is about. Mar Savar, even when Shmuel said that it works, even though you underpay hektish, it's only b'di'evet. Shmuel says hektish shechilaloi. Let's look back at the words of Shmuel. You're not allowed to do that. B'di'evet, if you did that, that's where it works. Shechilu in, but lechatchilaloi, and therefore you have to pay. You're allowed to underpay hektish. Now this requires a little bit of an explanation, because what does it mean? The arter you have to add. So let's see what Rashi says. In the ha'imit me'ina, there's no dinayna by hektish. Loishna gedayla v'loishna ktana. L'chatchilaloi udvar Torah de egcha shavi mashma. It's mashma that you have to redeem something for its proper value. Even Shmuel agrees that you have to. Umar shavar afilu tchila egcha koldu mashma. Egcha means whatever you decide to give is going to be acceptable. Hilach, therefore, lavkuye isura afilu midrabanan shari. Even midrabanan, it's 100% mutter to do this. So the question is it mutter to do or not? According to one sheet, it's 100% mutter to make the swap, even though it's not right. Yes, you have to pay later, but the swap itself is mutter to do, even though it's not the right value. You're underpaying hektish. The other sheet holds no. You have to give the right value. Kavaltik. So that was the second option of how to understand the machlokes. The third option is, let's go back to the original pshat, that the brisa that Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish are arguing about. We had a big question. And that was, doesn't everybody agree that there's no dinayna by hektish? And let's stick to the Rabbi Yochanan saying that midaraisa is a good chilo, midarabbanan you add money, and Rish Lakish also midaraisa you add money. What is the machlokes telling? In Ubud Rav Chisda kamifli, they're arguing about Rav Chisda's halach. Yomar, Rav Chisda said, "My ein lahem I know." What does it mean when we say in the Mishnah that hektish doesn't have a din I know? It doesn't mean that it doesn't have the halacha of machzer shtus, but the mekach is kayim. Rather, you just ignore it, and too bad for hektish. Adrabah, einon the Torah say no. There's no din of the halachas of I know. Why? Because with hektish we're even more makbid. Turning on to Amud Beis, afilu pachus michdei I know chayzer, even less than michdei I know. Even if you underpay hektish by less than the sixth, the mekach is going to be bottle in ganzen. That's a much more chomerdike option. And therefore, that is the machlokes. According to Rish Lakish, the whole chil is bottled. Therefore, you have to redeem hektish with the right value. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, there's no dinay no, and the mekach is kai. Metzia frek gemar. Ribis v'ayna lahedjit. The Brisa says that there's ribis and ayna for a hedjit. The ain't ribis v'ayna lahektish, but there is no ribis or ayna for hektish. So you see, ain't ayna lahektish. So it should be shver. How could you say that the chil is not chal according to Rish Lakish? Frek gemara, I don't understand why you're asking from this Brisa. Mi alima mi masnisin. Why is it any better of a kasha from this Brisa than it was from the Mishnah, which we already forever? Do kimna b'tayrisena. We still down what does Rish Lakish lim shot in the Mishnah? It means einayna lahektish, meaning even tarchas michteina the mekach is bought, and therefore it's not a good chil. That's how we could look from the Brisa. Ribis v'dina so zok gemar mi alimas listen to kimna b'tayrisena. Zok gemar hachanami ribis v'din ayna lahedjit ve'ein ribis v'din ayna lahektish. Zok Rashi ve'ein din ayna lahektish afilu pachas mechtei ayna chayzer. Zok to Gemara. So nachma mi alim mesnisin dokim b'torah shana hachanami ribis v'din ayna lahedjit ve'ein ribis v'din ayna lahektish. And even if you underpay hektish by a little bit, it's going to be bottled l'mekach. Frek the Gemara, ihachi, hanyu dekatani seifa. Is this how you're going to explain the seifa? What does it say in the seifa? Zeh chomer behedjit mi behektish. It says zeh chomer behedjit mi behektish. This is a way where hedjit is more chomer than hektish. The problem is, we're saying now that by hektish, even less than the kedei ana, the mekach is going to be bottled. So if that's the case, it's not a chomer of hedjit, it's a chomer of hektish. So what's pshat at the Mishnah at the end says zeh chomer behedjit mi behektish? We're trying to list off cases where there's a greater chomer behedjit. So if you learn like we were learning until now, that einay no hektish means there's no dinay no, and even if you underpaid hektish by a sixth, the mekach is still kayim and nobody pays anybody else back. That's definitely a chomer behedjit. But if you're going to learn like a b'chista, that einay no hektish means that the mekach is bottled, so then how is this an example of chomer behedjit mi behektish? Zaktamar, you're right. Our ribis, it's referring only to the ribis. By ribis, there's no din ribis by hektish, but there is by hedjit. So that's what the chomer is talking about. But oibezoi, it should say, listening nami zeh chomer behektish mi behedjit. I know. Why wouldn't the Mishnah have also addressed I know as a chomer that hektish has over hedjit? Why did it only focus on the chomer of hedjit mi behektish l'gabi ribis? Why didn't the Mishnah also mention that l'gabi no hektish is more chomer than hedjit? Dr. Mark, it's very simple. Hochiach. Bishlam is a chomer behedjit mi behektish. Bishlam, when the Mishnah is itemizing certain ways, limited ways, in which hedjit is a greater chomer behektish, v'suloi. That would be a good example, because these examples are none other. Ela hektish zeh chomer v'suloi. By hektish, there's many ways in which hektish is more chomer than hedjit. So it doesn't make sense to list off one thing. In this way, punkt, hektish is more chomer. Hektish is chomer in every way. Gewaltig. Gewaltig. Tosfos adds a little bit of flavor here. Bishlam behedjit zeh chomer v'suloi pirish. Zeu chidush shehedjit chomer. It's a chidush that hedjit in certain ways is more chomer than hektish. Aval behektish zeh chomer bitmiya. Why would we mention zeh chomer? It's poshut that hektish is more chomer. Pirish ma chidushu shematzanu chomer behektish behedjit. Why is it such a great chiddush? We found a way in which hektish is more chomer. That's to be expected. It's the thing we don't expect, that hedjit is more chomer than hektish. That's what the Mishnah is highlighting. Okay, that takes us to the end of this Shakla V'Taya, and now the Gemara has a shayla. We listed off in this brisa that we quoted, there's no ribis for hektish. How would there be ribis for hektish? Ribis to hektish heichidam. What would be a case of charging hektish ribis where we can discuss if there's is there to charge hektish ribis or not? Ilema de uspe gizbar. What happened was is the Gizbar was in charge of the money of Hektish, and he lent out money of Hektish. I'm going to lend you 100, but when you pay back, you're going to pay back 120. The Hektish on behalf, the Gizbar on behalf of Hektish is lending out money for ribbis. For Gemara, that wouldn't work because it's usher to lend out money of Hektish. You're not allowed to, the Gizbar is not allowed to give out any money of Hektish unless he receives instantaneously money at that time to be Mechal the Hektish. A loan doesn't work. So if he gives a loan, it's as if he has taken the money of Hektish by himself. So for Gemara, the moment the Gizbar gives that money to the third party to lend, the Gizbar's moil, now it's the Gizbar's money, and now he is the Baldover. The Gizbar, once the Gizbar's moil, the money goes to Chulun, and now it's like it's the Gizbar's money, the Havaluhu the Hedjit. And it's like Hedjit Navad, it's also for the Gizbar to charge ribbis if he lends money to somebody. So that cannot be the case of ribbis by Hektish. So what would be the case? At the beginning of the season, Hektish likes to set up a long supply agreement, a long-term supply agreement for the silos that it needs. And it gave somebody a whole bunch of cash. It gave a vendor a whole bunch of cash and said, you're going to provide us based on 4 saw for every seller. So that is the rate. So you're going to give me 4 saw per dollar, let's say, for instance. You're going to give Hektish 4 saw, but here's $100. This should last you for the end of the season. And you're going to give us 4 saw for every dollar. And what happened was, is the Amdu Mishalish. In the meantime, the cost of flour went up. And now, really, only 3 saw you can get for $1. So what is the halacha? Kedetanya, we looked at Brisa. Hamakabel alav lasapik saltosh me'arba. And then the Amdu Mishalish. And then they went up. Misapek me'arba. He doesn't reduce the amount of flour that he gives. He has to give based on his original agreement. And therefore, that's a shtickle ribbis, because we know you're not even allowed to lend saw b'saw. I'm not allowed to lend you a saw of fruit and you'll pay back a saw. Because if it goes up in between, it looks like ribbis. But for Hektish, it would be allowed. How about mishalish v'amdu me'arba? What if the original deal was I would only give you 3 for a seller, but then wheat went down? Misabek me'arba. So either way, the merchant has to give Hektish the upper hand. Hektish al ha'elyon. When you do business with Hektish always gets the benefit. So this is a type of ribbis because you're taking in money, and when you're taking money, you're supposed to be giving only. You're supposed to be giving 4 saw, but now when you're going to give him the 4 saw per every dollar, you're really giving him a lot more because the saw has already went up. Tosfos has a big question about how this works, because if they gave you the money, how did that work? Because the money was not chal on anything. So how did this transaction work? Whenever they needed somebody to build a wall in Hektish, they never took stones of Hektish and gave it to the builders and told them to build a wall. Because what if during the construction, one of the workers leans on the brick, leans on the stone? He'll be moil. We don't want that to happen. So therefore, the Hektish would pay for a stone, but the stone would remain chulun. They wouldn't take possession of the stone. And therefore, the stone would remain chulun. So while all the building was done, the stone was chulun. And only afterwards did Hektish actually buy the stone and it got its kedusha. And this way, even if the workers leaned on the stone while they were working, they would not have been over me'ilah. So what they would do is, they didn't pay for it in advance. They would buy it on credit. And since they're not actually paying for it, the stones don't get their kedusha until Hektish actually transfers the cash to the vendor, the person who's selling them the stones. They always built with stones that didn't belong to Hektish, and only afterwards did Hektish pay for the stones, and it became Kodesh. So now you have a stone here that technically is not Mammon Hektish, but Lamait it's been controlled by Hektish. And the Gizbar lent out that stone for ribbis. That's the ribbis that we're talking about where we say there's no ribbis for hektish. Gewaltig. Ein bahem tashlume kefil. All of the items listed in our Mishnah, hektish, karka, avodim, stores, there's no din kefil. They don't pay kefil. A Ganav who steals them doesn't pay kefil. We know immediately. How do we know this? The Tanur Rabbanan. In the parsha of kefil, what does it say? I'll call that pesha is a klal. Al shor, al chamor, al seh, al salma is a prat. Al kol aveda sheyemer kiuzeh is chazav halal. So it's a klal prat to klal. And therefore, what types of items do you pay kefil if you steal? Only items that are similar to the prat. Ma prat nefurish davar metaltal v'gufa mamain. It's mobile. It itself has its own value. I've called davar metaltal v'gufa mamain. Yotzuk karkois. This excludes karkois from the din of kefil. Sheinu metaltal. They're not mobile. Yotzu avodim shugshul karkois. Avodim hokush karkois. Yotzu stories she'afal pisha metaltal. Even though stars are mobile. Ain't goof and mammon. They're not etzem money. They represent the chayv. Hekteshes amakra. Why is hektish not covered by the rules of kefil? Because it says re'eyu v'lo hektish. Only from your friend is there these dinim of kefil, not for hektish. V'lo tashlumi dalvei. There's no dalvei either. My timer tashlumi dalvei amarachman v'lo tashlumi shloisha v'arba. One of the payments in dalvei is the kefil. Once they're no longer paying cable, once you no longer pay cable for a hektish's animal that you stole, so you cannot have the alvei anymore, and therefore the whole alvei is bought. There's no din halachas of sharmechinam. There's no chiyuvim for a sharmechinam to do anything when he takes on hektish or karka or avodim or stars. Minan amili the Tanur Rabbanan. By the parsha of sharmechinam it says ki yitin isha re'eyu is a klal, kesav akelim is a prat, and then the good division is chazav akolo, klal prat akal, yat don elo kena prat. So the same shtickle as before. Ma prat before is davar metaltal v'guf ha'mamin. I've called davar metaltal v'guf ha'mamin. Yotu karkoish she'edam metaltlin. Yotu avodim shogshul karkoish. Yotu stories she'alfabisha metaltlin ein guf ha'mamin. Hekdeshes amar kare'eyu re'eyu v'le hekdesh. And the same thing with the Shemer Zocher, because when the Torah talks about Shemer Zocher, it uses the same klal prat to klal. Minat the milik the Tanur Rabbanan kit nishal re'eyu klal chamor aishor says prat v'chol beim elishmar chazav v'kalal. Klal prat klal yet don't look at the prat ma prat before davar metaltal v'guf ha'mamin. I've called davar metaltal v'guf ha'mamin yosef karkois she'edim metaltlin yotu avodim shugul karkois yotu shtoroi shafapi she'metaltlin ein guf ha'mamin and hekdesha shehukshul karkois yotu avodim shugul karkois yotu shtoroi shafapi she'metaltlin guf ha'mamin hekdesha amar re'eyu v'lo shal hekdesh. Gewaltig. So we'll stop here with Baruch Hashem. We finished Daf Nun Zayin, and tomorrow Be'ez Hashem we'll learn Daf Nun Ches, and we'll start from the two dots here at the bottom of Nun Zayin Amud Beis. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.